Welcome back to our channel. Today we're here to explore the remarkable journey of William Shepard, better known as Shep, a man who started out swimming through muddy waters on secret operations and wound up being the very first commander of the International Space Station. His is a story that weaves together grit, adaptability, discipline, and an unshakable sense of duty. And yet, beneath his tough-as-nails resume, there's also a story of quiet determination, surprising vulnerabilities, and a tenacious belief that we can always push our boundaries, no matter how vast they seem. Born in Oak Ridge, Tennessee in 1949, Shepard came of age in a time when the world seemed to be stretching its limits in every sense. Just 4 years earlier, Oak Ridge had been a clandestine hub of the Manhattan Project, so even his birthplace was soaked in the aura of secrecy and scientific frontier. Growing up in the aftermath of World War II and in the midst of the Cold War, Shepard was surrounded by an undercurrent of tension that defined much of mid-20th century America. The nuclear arms race, the space race, and rapidly shifting cultural norms combined to create an atmosphere where the question wasn't if you would be drawn into grander struggles, but how. In so many ways, Oak Ridge was a microcosm of that era. While his neighbors and family led ordinary American lives, school days, baseball games, weekend chores, a deeper resonance of scientific ambition and strategic importance pulsed just beneath the surface. As a young boy, Shepard was fascinated by anything that represented exploration. Friends from his teen years recall how he would pore over science magazines that highlighted NASA's budding ventures, or read about undersea operations that the Navy was pioneering. While some kids daydreamed about playing professional sports, Shepard's dreams leaned toward the extraordinary, deep-sea diving, intricate underwater missions, rockets soaring into the night sky. He possessed a restless curiosity and a hunger to see the world beyond its conventional borders. This was the same era in which the first American astronauts were making headlines, plastered all over newspapers and magazines. The Mercury 7 were fast becoming national heroes, icons of a new breed of explorer. Yet for Shepard, the call wasn't just about the stars, it was also about the dark, mysterious world beneath the waves. Even as a teenager, he felt equally drawn to the silent discipline of underwater operations and the boundless wonder of the cosmos. But just because he had grand ambitions didn't mean the path would be straightforward. While he showed aptitude in math and science in high school, there were plenty of challenges along the way. He was not the most flamboyant student. He could be methodical to the point of seeming reserved, more comfortable with quietly absorbing the details than showing off in the spotlight. He also played sports, not necessarily as the star athlete, but enough to demonstrate a competitive spirit and a willingness to push his own limits physically. If a coach told him to run 5 laps, Shepard would run 6. He was that sort of person. His focus and discipline hinted at the traits that would serve him well in the decades to come, though nobody at the time could have guessed just how far those traits would take him. When it came time to consider college, Shepard found a special draw to engineering. More than the theoretical, he craved understanding how complex machines worked, how designs could be tested and refined. He wanted to take things apart and build them anew. This inclination led him first to the U.S. Naval Academy, where he studied aerospace engineering, and later to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, where he pursued graduate-level work in mechanical engineering and ocean engineering. The combination was unusual. Many Navy men studied engineering. Sure, but to chase both aeronautics and ocean engineering suggested someone who had, at the very least, an eclectic set of passions. While at MIT, Shepard was known for his keen mind and a certain calm intensity. Professors who taught him Recall a student who seldom wasted words, but who always dissected a problem thoroughly and precisely. That quiet thoroughness would become a hallmark of his later endeavors. His academic background was more than just lines on a resume. It opened doors. By the late 1970s, the Navy was expanding its special operations community, including SEAL teams, to handle a range of clandestine missions around the world. Shepard saw in the SEALs the perfect fusion of mental challenge and physical rigor. And in turn, certain segments of the Navy saw promise in him. Here was a young officer who understood complex engineering, yet was also physically fit, unafraid of extremely demanding tasks. His path to the SEALs was not entirely straightforward. There were medical exams, psychological screenings, and the grueling basic underwater demolition/SEAL, BUD/S training that weeded out most candidates. This brutal training pushed Shepard beyond anything he'd experienced in a classroom or campus gym. Extended swims in frigid waters, Hell Week, constant sleep deprivation, and the weight of never letting your teammates down. That's where you discover if you truly have the resolve. Shepard passed. He earned his trident, that emblematic gold pin that distinguished him as a member of one of the Navy's most elite units. Even then, among SEALs, he was regarded as uncommonly driven. One story that floated around the corridors was that he once volunteered for extra recon dives just to gather advanced data on currents, information that might give his team a tactical advantage in a future mission. Whether entirely true or embellished by Navy lore, it painted a vivid picture. Shepard was the type who believed victory lay not just in muscle power or weaponry, but in meticulous preparation and a willingness to do what others wouldn't. At the same time, the Cold War was in full swing. The Soviet Union and the United States were vying for influence across the globe. Submarine cat and mouse games beneath the Arctic ice, clandestine commando raids, espionage in far-flung corners. This was the realm in which SEAL Team 1 found itself operating in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Shepard, though not the highest-ranking operative, stood out for his capacity to blend leadership, engineering acumen, and unflappable calm. Quiet and deliberate, he could lead a small unit on a covert insertion one day and then study advanced technologies in a lab the next. More than a few colleagues found it uncanny how easily he moved between these distinct worlds. And while the details of specific missions remain classified, those who served alongside him remembered a man who didn't hesitate to shoulder responsibility or to make tough calls under pressure. Yet for Shepard, there was another call beckoning. He had this long-standing fascination with space. Throughout the early 1980s, NASA was looking for new types of astronauts, no longer just test pilots from the Air Force or Navy, but mission specialists, payload specialists, and those with unique skill sets that might benefit research in orbit. When NASA announced openings for its astronaut program, Shepard's heart must have skipped a beat. This was the era of the space shuttle, a revolution in how we approached a low Earth orbit. It was risky and bold, and NASA knew it needed sharp minds capable of both technical precision and creative problem-solving under crisis. A SEAL with multiple engineering degrees fit the bill perfectly, though it was highly unusual for someone from special operations to throw his hat in the ring. Shep did just that. In 1984, NASA accepted him into its astronaut training program. This marked a radical transition. Overnight, Shepard went from a small team environment where stealth and secrecy reigned to the public eye of the space agency, which involved interviews, press announcements, and the watchful gaze of millions around the world every time a shuttle launched. His new home was Johnson Space Center in Houston, where he underwent countless hours of flight simulations, study sessions, neutral buoyancy training in giant pools, and more. He adapted quickly, applying the same discipline he honed as a SEAL, although he had to learn an entirely new vocabulary and skill set. Orbital mechanics, spacecraft systems, emergency procedures in microgravity. These replaced the stealth approaches and ballistic tactics he had once studied. Fellow astronauts nicknamed him Shep because of his calm, guiding presence, and perhaps a little play on words with his last name. And NASA officials liked having a straightforward, unflappable figure who could stay focused even under extreme stress. If you can keep your nerve in the freezing dark of a clandestine dive, you can likely handle a sudden systems failure halfway to orbit. Over the next several years, Shepard flew on 4 space shuttle missions, contributing to everything from satellite deployment to the early stages of building space infrastructure that would become part of the International Space Station project. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, NASA had begun planning with international partners, including the Russians, for an ambitious new space station. Initially dubbed Space Station Freedom, it eventually morphed into what we now know as the International Space Station, ISS. The concept was unprecedented. Unite former Cold War rivals and a host of other nations in the shared pursuit of long-duration habitation in low Earth orbit. Though the politics and engineering challenges were immense, the plan pushed forward. Shepard kept earning respect within NASA. His engineering background, experience in the U.S. Navy, and ability to keep calm under intensifying pressure made him a top candidate for future high-stakes missions. In the late 1990s, the Space Shuttle was placing the first building blocks of the ISS into orbit, while Russian Proton rockets lofted other segments. The station was still just a skeleton of modules waiting to be joined and activated. NASA and Roscosmos needed someone they trusted to command the very first crew, designated Expedition 1. That wasn't a trivial choice. Living aboard the station for months at a time, orchestrating science experiments, managing potential technical disasters, and maintaining good diplomatic relations with Russian cosmonauts was no small feat. Many believe that Shep's unusual background, someone who understood discipline, leadership, negotiation, and the spirit of exploration, made him the ideal pick. When he was officially named Commander of Expedition 1, Shepard knew it meant leaving Earth for more than 4 months. He and his 2 Russian crewmates, Yuri Gidzenko and Sergei Krikalev, underwent rigorous training in both the U.S. and Russia. He spent time at Star City outside Moscow, learning the intricacies of the Soyuz spacecraft, brushing up on Russian language skills, and forging relationships with the cosmonauts. This immersion into Russian culture and engineering was vital. The ISS was an international collaboration, and synergy was crucial for success. Tensions could run high, however, especially given that NASA and Roscosmos sometimes had different protocols and ways of solving problems. But Shep, with his background in bridging worlds, whether it was bridging the realm of engineering and special operations, or bridging East and West, did his best to remain a steady figure. Expedition 1 launched on October 31, 2000, aboard a Russian Soyuz rocket. For Shepard, strapping into a cramped capsule atop a Russian rocket was a whole new experience. Even after 4 shuttle flights, the difference in technology, the raw physical sensations, and the knowledge that this time he would be leaving the planet for a long while brought a new level of intensity. When the Soyuz docked to the embryonic ISS 2 days later, humanity took a pivotal step. The trio floated inside, turning on lights, activating systems, and effectively transforming cold metal modules into a livable outpost. Shepard was now responsible for not only the survival of his team, but the success of an experiment in international cooperation. No matter that he was once trained for stealth infiltration in hostile waters, this was a new definition of hostile environment. Those first weeks were tense. The station was in its infancy, with incomplete modules, limited power, and hardware that sometimes malfunctioned. The potential for hazard was everywhere: air leaks, fire, or sudden depressurization in a module that had never been inhabited. Communication dropouts were frequent. In more than one instance, the trio had to troubleshoot problems that weren't covered in any manual. Crew diaries mention a frightening moment when an onboard system shut down unexpectedly, casting doubt on the station's life support capabilities. It was precisely the sort of situation that demanded Shepard's characteristic calm. Fellow astronauts on the ground reading daily updates remarked that Shep managed these stressful predicaments with the same unshakable poise he demonstrated in SEAL training. If you read or hear about these incidents now, they might sound mild, but at the time there was a real, if small, possibility that the crew might need an emergency evacuation. On top of that, the mission was psychologically demanding. Weeks turned into months during which they had limited privacy. Familiar Earth comforts, a breeze on your face, a walk in the sun, a favorite home-cooked meal, were just distant memories. Having been a SEAL, Shepard was used to discomfort, but living in microgravity for 141 days was a distinct kind of challenge. The crew worked to establish routines that balanced station maintenance, scientific experiments, daily exercise to stave off muscle atrophy, and personal downtime. One rarely mentioned detail is that Shepard tried to keep a small, quiet corner in the station for reflection, even if it was just a tiny space by a window with a view of Earth. He believed that solitude, even for a few minutes, was essential to staying mentally sharp. An often overlooked anecdote from Expedition 1's diaries involves Shepard's reaction to severe frustration with certain station software that wasn't cooperating with the onboard hardware. There was a moment when repeated errors caused vital station data to freeze, and the fix wasn't straightforward. Tempers flared, especially with ground control. Shepard, normally measured, had one of his rare outbursts, reportedly insisting that the crew needed more autonomy to handle issues their way. That tension highlighted how different NASA's approach was from the Russian approach. In NASA's culture, ground control had a huge say in every procedure. In the Russian model, cosmonauts were more self-reliant. Shepard's background as a SEAL who valued quick, decisive action placed him somewhat in the Russian camp on this point. Interestingly enough, ultimately NASA did grant the crew more leeway, and they resolved the glitch. It was a small conflict, but it painted a vivid picture of how the uncharted environment of ISS forced everyone to adapt, sometimes painfully, to the realities of a new era of space cooperation. Of course, as the first commander of the ISS, Shepard carried not just the responsibilities for day-to-day station life, but also the symbolic weight of forging a new path. He recognized the significance of that from a historical perspective. There had been previous space stations, Skylab for the US and Mir for the Russians, but never an orbital platform intended to be the permanent stepping stone for humanity's sustained presence in space. And now, Shepard was the face of that mission, broadcast across the globe. The paradox was not lost on him. He had once operated in the shadows, stealthily approaching enemy shores or working covert recon. Now cameras followed his every move, and mission updates were reported by news outlets around the world. He rarely gave interviews about his SEAL days, preferring to keep that part of his background subdued. In part, he believed that the focus should remain on the ISS mission and the significance of joint space exploration. There's a certain stoicism, or perhaps humility, in that approach. During one of their video calls with the ground, Shepard famously demonstrated a few martial arts exercises in zero gravity, not out of bravado, but to show that the body can adapt to floating in unexpected ways. It was a lighthearted moment that garnered some attention back on Earth, reinforcing this image of a multifaceted man who could do a few flips in microgravity while still maintaining the serious responsibilities of a mission commander. Privately, though, Shepard was well aware that no amount of martial arts training could solve a catastrophic station failure. Only teamwork, technical skill, and cooperation with ground control could do that. Despite the best planning, accidents did happen. On several occasions, Shepard, Gidzenko, and Krikalev had to improvise temporary fixes, from applying homemade patches to tinkering with improvised tools. Some of these incidents never made the headlines but were recorded in internal NASA logs. Engineers back at Houston marveled that the trio managed to keep the station operational in conditions that often matched the complexity of a submarine on a bad day. In fact, some engineers joked that Shep's experiences on cramped Navy vessels had prepared him perfectly for the ISS, but the dangers of a submarine sinking were quite different from the existential threat of depressurizing in space. If they ran out of air 200 nautical miles above Earth, rescue options were limited. The crew had their Soyuz escape craft, but using it would have meant abandoning the station. Shepard was determined not to let that happen on his watch, and he didn't. After 141 days, Expedition 1 successfully handed over the station to a new crew and returned to Earth in March 2001. By that point, the trio had turned a few linked modules into a functioning orbital home. When they landed, Shepard came out looking visibly tired, as do most astronauts after long-duration flights. But behind that fatigue, there was a sense of accomplishment. They had established a human foothold in space that endures to this day. Among NASA officials, Shepard's name became synonymous with measured leadership and the ability to navigate cultural and technical hurdles alike. For many Americans, especially those who recalled his SEAL background, he became a symbol of bridging the gap between military discipline and scientific exploration. Still, the story of William Shepard didn't end the moment he touched back down on the plains of Kazakhstan. He remained involved at NASA for a time, contributing to the evolution of the ISS and training subsequent crews. Yet as the station expanded and more modules were added, NASA's joint operation with Russia continued to grow in complexity. There were disagreements over budgets, design changes, timelines, and control systems. Shepard's expertise and direct experience made him a valuable voice in these debates, but also sometimes put him at odds with management who wanted to keep the pace of assembly or follow certain established protocols. He believed strongly in the importance of flexible problem solving, an ethos he credited to his SEAL background. NASA's bureaucracy sometimes chafed at that approach. One lesser-known controversy involved the Expedition 1 mission patch. As commander, Shepard wanted a design that highlighted unity and the station's role as a bridge between cultures. Meanwhile, certain NASA officials and marketing teams had their own ideas, preferring a more traditional symbolic approach. The final patch ended up being a compromise, though not entirely to Shepard's liking, according to some NASA insiders. It might sound minor, but patches carry deep cultural significance among astronauts, like a family crest for each mission crew. Reflecting on this, some see it as emblematic of how every detail of the ISS became subject to international negotiation, from the big issues like docking systems down to symbolic artwork. Around 2002, Shepard decided to retire from active astronaut duty. He had devoted nearly 2 decades to NASA and served in the Navy for even longer. His list of decorations includes the Navy SEAL Trident, multiple NASA spaceflight medals, the Defense Superior Service Medal, and the Legion of Merit, among others. For a time, he stayed involved in various advisory capacities, sometimes being called upon for his unique perspective on how to keep the station safe and the crews healthy. Beyond the decorations, though, Shepard's legacy rests on his bridging of worlds, from diving in the dark waters of Cold War operations to living in the open expanses of Earth orbit. He represented a shift in how we might view military-trained astronauts. In the earlier days of space exploration, test pilots were indeed from the military, but mostly from air or flight backgrounds. Shepard's path showcased that a special operations officer, shaped by clandestine missions, could contribute just as critically to the peaceful exploration of space. It was a story that captured the public's imagination. The warrior who became a pioneer, the man who once evaded detection underwater, now voluntarily placed himself on the most visible stage imaginable, an international lab circling above our heads. Personal stories from his SEAL days are still sparse. Shepard has always been discreet about specifics, yet some leaked anecdotes provide glimpses into a young officer who was fearless. One story related by a fellow SEAL suggests that Shepard once swam alongside a submarine in near-freezing water to scout a concealed approach route during a training exercise. Another rumor has it that he was known to volunteer for the most punishing types of training runs, not for bravado, but because he wanted to test his mental fortitude to the limit. Such fragments of stories give us a sense of how the core qualities of discipline, risk management, and fearlessness carried seamlessly into his astronaut career. The difference is that in space, the environment is even more extreme. Every element from air to water has to be artificially managed. If something goes wrong, there's nowhere to run except back to Earth in a cramped emergency capsule. That knowledge can weigh heavily on a crew member's mind. Shepard's skill was in compartmentalizing fear, focusing on the solution rather than the potential disaster. A question that often arises: how did the Navy SEAL ethos mesh with NASA's cooperative, highly public approach? Former colleagues say Shep managed the tension by focusing on the shared mission. For a SEAL, the mission is everything, and your team's cohesion is paramount. In NASA, likewise, the mission is everything, and your crew's cohesion can literally mean the difference between life and death. The difference is that NASA places a higher emphasis on sharing success with the public, engaging with media, and supporting an ongoing research agenda that belongs to the entire planet. Shepard's approach was to apply disciplined leadership and authenticity. If cameras were rolling, that was fine. It didn't change the job that needed doing. Perhaps this unruffled attitude is one reason he remains well-liked by so many flight controllers, astronauts, and staff who worked with him. Yet behind that calm exterior, there's a vulnerability that many long-duration astronauts experience. Some speak of the profound loneliness that comes from seeing Earth as a distant sphere, especially in the early days of station living when there were so few supply vehicles and visits. An often quoted statistic is how there were nights when the ISS had smaller volume than a typical house, with just 3 people drifting in darkness above Earth's night side. In those moments, personal reflection could become overwhelming. Shepard, in one private journal entry, later shared in part in a NASA archive, wrote about the weight of Earth below. So much life and energy swirling in that blue orb while they hovered in a quiet vacuum. He said, paraphrasing, that it made him appreciate both the fragility and resilience of our planet. It was a perspective shift many astronauts have expressed, known informally as the overview effect. But coming from a man so used to operating under the radar, it offers a rare glimpse into the depth of his emotional connection to the mission. When we explore Shepard's role in broader historical debates, it's important to realize he straddled the tail end of the Cold War and the dawn of a new era of cooperation in space. America and the Soviet Union had raced to the moon in the 1960s, yet by the 1990s, NASA was relying on Russian rockets to get astronauts to a station built partly with Russian modules. Shepard was part of that cross-cultural pivot, often wearing multiple hats: soldier, engineer, diplomat, explorer. Some critics argued that NASA was ceding too much control to Russia in the ISS partnership, while others insisted that it represented a peaceful triumph of diplomacy. Shepard, for his part, was pragmatic. He simply wanted the station to function well and to serve as a platform for research and eventually deeper exploration, perhaps to the moon or Mars. On at least one occasion, he publicly praised Russian engineering for being robust and straightforward, which was not always popular among some American engineers who prided themselves on NASA's more advanced or refined designs. Such statements underlined how he sought balance, free from the old stereotypes of us versus them. Over time, the ISS grew into the sprawling complex we recognize today, hosting astronauts and cosmonauts from many nations. Space agencies from Canada, Europe, and Japan also contributed modules and equipment. Although Shepard wasn't there for the station's largest expansions, his foundational work helped set the tone. Later ISS commanders have spoken of inheriting Shep's house, a colloquial nod to the way he and his crewmates made the early modules livable in the first place. Returning to Earth in 2001 also meant returning to a drastically changed geopolitical climate. Within the same year, September 11th rocked the global order, sparking new military conflicts and tensions. Shepard, with his military background, had complex feelings about the unfolding war on terror, though he rarely commented publicly. One might imagine that seeing Earth from orbit and seeing how arbitrary national borders can appear could lend a new perspective on how humanity's conflicts might be overshadowed by our shared vulnerability on this planet. He remained largely private about his opinions, though it's said he closely followed developments in Afghanistan, where SEAL teams were soon deployed in large numbers. After retiring, Shepard maintained ties with certain corners of the special operations community and with NASA, participating in some speaking engagements. But his involvement was selective. He never sought the limelight of being a celebrity astronaut. Instead, he focused on consulting for aerospace companies, occasionally advising on ISS-related issues, and indulging a passion for building and tinkering with various engineering projects. People who've met him at these smaller events say that he remains much like he was in his SEAL and NASA days, calm, methodical, and quick to credit his team before himself. What can we learn from William Shepard's story? One lesson is that boundaries, be they national, physical, or personal, are often more porous than we think. A man trained to operate in secrecy as a Navy SEAL might one day stand before the entire world as a NASA commander. Another lesson is that dedication and meticulous preparation can prepare us for the unimaginable. Throughout his life, Shepard demonstrated that the same core skills, discipline, focus, and collaboration can be applied whether you're trudging through a swamp at midnight or floating over Earth at 17,500 miles per hour. And maybe most poignantly, his story reminds us that the greatest frontiers, be they ocean depths or cosmic infinity, ultimately become extensions of our human story. The sense of wonder, the drive to understand and explore, and the bonds we form with our fellow explorers. Those are what make any hostile environment survivable and even uplifting. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.